So it's our third and final part of lesson 4. This video will probably be fairly short. So we've created our GitHub accounts. We've installed Git on our machines. So our next step is to create a repository. So typically what we do is we create the repository on the GitHub website, and then we initialize Git in our project in our local machine, and then we connect them together. And then we can make changes and create new versions using Git and GitHub every time we make changes. So a repository is basically a single project. So if I'm making 10 different web applications, I'm going to make a separate repository for each one. And it contains all the files that our project's going to need. So to make a repository, we're just going to go to GitHub. And up at the top right, there's a little plus sign. So we just create new repository. Now, there's a gotcha here. We must give it a name. Yes, that's right. I mean, that's a good point. You can add your college email if you like to your existing GitHub account. So Viraj, I will show people how to do that in a minute. If you just go into your account settings, you click on your avatar and go to your profile, there is an option here. If you already had a GitHub account, if you go to edit your profile, somewhere in here, maybe it's under settings. Yeah, under settings and emails, you can add multiple emails. So I've got both my in front of the net and my college email in one account if you want it. So I'm going to give the repository a name. So what I would suggest, so call your repository, for example, phpflix. You can put in a description. So this might be, first PHP site for Comp1006. And now, Elena, you mentioned private. All you have to do, by default, your repository will be public. Make sure you change it to private. And then no one else but you has access unless you invite them. So make sure your repository is private. Here's a gotcha. Please leave these blank. We are going to create a README file, but we are not creating it on GitHub. We're going to create the README file on our computer. So just leave these unchecked, please, always. So for your assignment, you're going to make a new repository just like this. You'll create the name. You'll call it Comp1006-AS1. The description is optional, and you must choose private. You do not want to be publishing your database credentials and publishing your code for other people to see. Okay, so for today, your repository name is phpflix. You choose private. That's all you have to do, and then you just click the green Create button. And this creates an empty repository. Now, GitHub does support drag and drop of files, but we never want to use drag and drop. Because first of all, drag and drop does not support uploading folders. It also doesn't support descriptive commit messages. So you've got an empty project here. So what you want to do now is we need to connect our existing repository, our existing project. We want to initialize Git down here in our phpflix folder. And then we want to connect it to our GitHub repository and push or upload our code. Now, if I'm going to go and open up my htdocs folder, you'll notice something about my folder. If I go into czamp and htdocs, and here's my phpflix, notice I've got this little hidden folder here called .git. If you look at your htdocs PHP Flix folder, you won't have this yet. I have this folder because I've already initialized Git in my PHP Flix local folder. You'll need to do this. So I'll show you how to do it. So now we're going to get into using the command line. So if you're in Visual Studio Code, you can click View Terminal, and it'll open up this window here at the bottom. Just clear mine out. If you are in PHP Storm, I'll just show you how to open the terminal there. So if you're in PHP Storm, there's a little button down here at the bottom, near the bottom left, that says Terminal. You can click it and you'll get your terminal. Opens a Windows PowerShell window here. Oops. And to change the current directory, you type CD. So if you want to make sure you're in this directory, so Massa, what directory are you in? Are you not in? It should show you're in your XAMPP htdocs PHP Flix. If not, the change directory command is CD. So it should show you that you're in your PHP Flix folder. So the first thing we want to make sure is that Git got installed properly. You can run the command git space, git -- version. I'll put this command in the chat as well. So type git -- version and hit enter. And this will show you what version of Git is installed on your machine. If you get an error saying Git is not a recognized command, you need to make sure you run the Git installer. You may not have installed Git on your machine if you don't get some sort of response with a version. So now what we want to do is initialize Git in our PHP Flix folder. That means Git will watch for changes. So anytime we make a new file, delete a file, or save changes, Git will keep track of those changes for us. And this will also, when we initialize Git, it'll create this little .git folder inside PHP Flix. So make sure at your command prompt or terminal, we are in the PHP Flix directory. So we're going to run the command, and I'll put it in the chat. We're going to run the command Git Init. So this is going to initialize Git and watch for changes. If you're comfortable with Git Desktop, yes. I don't like it. I don't find it has the same amount of control as the command line. But if you're comfortable with it and it works for you, yes, there is a GitHub Desktop, like a graphical program you can use. But it's fairly limited. I would recommend personally using the commands and getting familiar with them is a good idea. There are some Git tools. Yep, you can use the version control through. You are permitted to do that if that works for you. So we're going to run Git Init, and you'll get a similar message, except yours should say Initialize Git Repository in. So once you do that, you'll get a little Git folder in here. VS Code doesn't support terminal. Not sure what you mean, Josh, and I've got the terminal right here. You just click on View and Terminal. Belinda, you may not, it's a hidden folder. You'll notice the folder color is really hard to see. If you don't see it, you may have to click on View and check Hidden Items. Oh, yeah, if you're in the browser, because if you're using VS Code Dev, your files aren't on your machine. Your files live in the cloud. So I haven't really worked with VS Code Dev. So you'll have to look at how you would integrate with Git for that. I don't know off the top of my head. So we only have to run Git Init once per project. That means Git is now going to watch this folder for changes. So we don't have to run the Git Init command again in this project. Now I've put all the Git commands you need here on Blackboard. So for your assignment, you'll create a new assignment 1 folder and you'll have to run Git Init. But the commands you need are here for future reference. So Git Init, you do this once to create a local repository. Then anytime we want to create a new version, we run git add dot and then git commit. So this will make a new version. So let's run the command. Actually, I need to change my files and just take my password out. I don't want to upload my AWS password. So I'm just going to change my files for a second before I commit them. What's not a document, Nick, you'll see a little hidden folder called .git. Belinda, you don't need to because yours is private. My repository is public so that you guys can use it as reference. So now we want to add all the files. So type the command git space add space dot. The dot is like a wildcard. It means all file names and all file extensions. So run the command git add dot. I'll put it in the chat. So that is going to add all of the files to your version. So that's step 2. Git space add space dot. Yes. What does the warning say, Joshin? That's fine. Not a problem. That's just about carriage returns. So now we want to make a new version or a new commit. And this command, again, it's on Blackboard. It's going to be git commit -m, which stands for message. And this is where we put in a description of what work we did. So I'm going to put it in as lesson 4 input validation, right? That's what we did today. We added input validation. Again, I'll put it in the chat. So this makes a new version. So git commit -m. And then in double quotes, I put in, I'll put in lesson 4, input validation. So that's going to be the name of this version. So if I go back and look at this version 2 months from now, I'll know it's lesson 4 and that we were working on input validation today. So that's step 3. We've run git init, so Git is watching for changes. We did git add dot to add all the files. And now we've made a commit or a new version. So it's like a snapshot of the project at this date and time. And Git will timestamp it on January 31st, 10:16 or 10:15 a.m. Now the next step you guys need to do, I've already done. The next command is actually in your Git repository when we set it up. It's this command. Git Remote Add, and then the URL to our repository. So I'll just put in, username here. So you're going to run this command next, but make sure you replace where I've put in username here. You need to put in your own. If you copy it from GitHub, it includes your user. Yes, there's a fix for that. What is this line doing? Git Remote Add origin, and then it includes the URL to your project. What do you think this line is doing? What does that command mean? We only have to do this one time per project. What would adding the remote with the URL of our Git repository, what do you think is happening here? What would adding the remote do? Exactly, Sarah. We're connecting our local folder to this URL. We're tying them, we're connecting them together. So you're going to put that line here in your terminal, but again, make sure you put your username. And you might get an error. Your username would go here. And hit enter. And then many of you will get the response that Joshin got, unable to auto-detect email address. So what this means is when you try to connect to your GitHub repository, Windows might say, you're not authenticated. Like, we don't know which GitHub user are you, right? Because no one should be able to connect to your repository except you. So try that command, Git Remote Add origin. And you may get an error like Joshin got, unable to auto-detect email address. If that's the case, we just have to add a couple of other commands first. We'll only have to do this once. We'll never have to do this again, unless you get a new computer. So if you get an error trying to add the origin, I'll put the commands in the chat that you need. I never remember them, so I always have to look them up. So first you put in you'll have to run this command I'm putting in the chat first. Git config -- global. So this is going to store your GitHub username. Hamid, I will answer that. Let's deal with this one first, just so I don't confuse people. Okay, so I will come back. It is an excellent question. So run this command that I just put in the chat, git config -- global user.name, and then in double quotes, put in your GitHub username. Then you're going to run this command, git config -- global user.email, and put in the email address. No. Oh, and if you didn't get an authentication error, then you've probably set your Git credentials in your operating system already. You only need to do this if, like Josh, and when you tried adding the remote, it says, we don't know who you are. So we can't let you add the remote because we don't know if it's your remote or someone else's. So those two commands where you're configuring your operating system, you're connecting it to your GitHub account, basically. Once you've run this, configured your username and email, you can then try I'll put it back in, you can try adding the remote again. So first you're going to configure your username, then you're going to configure your email. This will save these into your Windows credentials. And then it should allow you to try and connect to your repository. It might prompt you for your GitHub password when you do this. If you get prompted for the GitHub password when running your remote origin, yep, Melinda, that's fine. If it didn't give you a warning, then you should be able to run the Git Remote Add origin. So once you've executed this command, the Git Remote Add origin, now our local folder and our GitHub repository, they're linked. So our last step is to push or upload our code. So that way, if our computer breaks, dies, is stolen, our code is backed up to GitHub. So the last command for this, you're going to do git push -u, which stands for unconditional, from the origin folder to what's called the master branch. So I'm going to run this command. I put it in the chat. I'm going to run this command in my terminal as well. You can use either. Main is new. I'm a bit old school, so I keep using master. It doesn't matter whether you use main or master. So I'm going to push, and this uploads my code. So it tells me 4 files. And then if you go back to your project, and now I can see, if I look, it says my repository was updated 29 seconds ago. And now it shows me, right, my commit message. So these files, like movie details, it's got my latest commit message that says lesson 4 input validation. Now, I've been using Git in my project, so when I click on commits, we can see here are those messages. What we did in lesson 2, the 3 parts of last week, and then today's files. You need the word Git before it, I think. Sarah, you may have missed Git. So it's Git space push space origin space master. So the commands always start with the keyword Git. So if I lose my computer, I haven't lost my code, right? I can just go grab a new computer, download my repository, and keep working. So you should be in the habit, whenever you're working, you should be making Git repositories in all of your courses for all your assignments, whether your instructors ask you to or not. And when you're working on an assignment and you finish working for the day, you should add, commit, and push so your work gets committed to GitHub. And then you are never going to lose your work. Yeah, it's an online backup. For each assignment, yes, you do, Massa. You don't have to do it for every lesson, but it's a good idea. So in the assignment, 2 of your marks, I want to see at least 2 commits. So you can't just upload the files when you're done. As you're working, I want to see that you are committing to GitHub. Okay, Tyler, if you got does not, now I'll help debug in a couple of minutes, but if you're getting this, Tyler, make sure you've got the Git folder that you've initialized Git here. A commit is a version. So Elena, I've got 6 commits. I have uploaded 6 versions of the code. 2 versions today, 3 versions last week, and 1 version the week before. Okay, so Tyler, you have to run the Git, it means you have to run the commands again, starting with Git Init. You've missed the Git Init command. Well, each version is different. So when I click, it shows me the changes, right? In the previous version, I did not have the max length and required. So this was the previous commit or version. This is the latest commit or version. I mean, how did I get to this page? From the main repository page, there's a link here. It shows you the number of commits. So when you click it, this shows you the commit history or the version history, all the different versions of the project. Elena, you don't have to do it. I don't do it every single time I save a change, but every time I either make a major change or when I stop working for the day, yes, I add the files, I make a new commit and push. That's my workflow. So for example, I'll show you a project I was working on. Let me see it going. A commit is a new version, Hamid. So here's one. So Elena, how often did I commit? So I was working on this. Whoops, this is, try and find one. Okay, so here was an old client site. They're not using it anymore. So I worked on this a few years ago. So, when I updated the CSS, I was done working for the day. So I made 2 versions that day. I set up the database, I set up the CSS, I committed each version. I didn't work again on the project again for a few days. But when I was done for the day, I worked again in November, made a few updates. So each time, so usually 1 or 2 commits a day as I was working on a project. So this project had 16 different versions. So I'm going to make 1 more file and then I'm going to stop. And I know probably some people have errors, so I can stick around and do a little debugging. So I also want to create a README file. So something like so here's a README file that describes the project and how to download it and run it. So all of our repositories should have README files. It's like a little documentation file describing what's in the project. So I'm going to make a README file, and then we'll go through this add, commit, and push process one more time. So here's our current project. So we're going to add a documentation file that describes what this project is. So in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to make one new file. It has a special name. It's readme.md. README is all caps, and MD stands for Markdown. So it supports both HTML and plain text. So I'll put on a heading and an HTML description. And now I'm going to put in a link to my live site. So you can put in a link to your AWS site. So I'm putting in a description of what this website is. And by calling the file readme.md, this description will show up on my repository homepage in a minute. So I've made a new file, right? So this file lives on my computer. But if I go and look at the GitHub repository, this file is not there yet. If I refresh it, my page, there's no README file here. So we need to now, I've made changes to my local project. So there are three commands I need to run in order to add this file to my GitHub repository. Okay, so save the changes. And I'll probably update the README file as we go through the semester and add more features to it. So first I'm going to run the command we've already run, which is git add space dot. So go ahead and run that command in your terminal, git space add space dot. So that's going to add my new file. What do you think our second command will be? We want to save a new version. So what command will we run to save a new version? Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to run git commit -m. I'll call this lesson 4 part 3. And what did we do in this version? What change did we make to the project that we can put in our description? What's different about this commit or this version from the last one? We've added something to the project. Yeah, right. We've got, right? Yeah, we created or we added the README. So I'm going to use that in my message. So when I look at the commit history later, I know this is what this version, This is the change in this version. So I'll hit enter. So I'm going to copy that command. I'm going to run it in my terminal. Git commit -m with a message that said lesson 4 part 3, add the README file. So I've made a new version on my local machine. What do we have to do now? If I look in my browser, however, the README still isn't here. So we've created a new version locally. I've got to run one more command to copy this change up to GitHub. What command do we want to run this time? So we've got a new commit on our machine. How do we sync that change to GitHub? We ran add, we ran commit. We need one more command. Git something. Thank you, Owen. Again, we're going to push. We're going to push. Push will upload the files. And I'll hit enter. Tells me it's done with git push -u origin master. And Owen's put it in the chat as well. I'll share it publicly. And now when I go back to my browser, if I hit refresh, notice this message is going to go away. And now my little README file is displayed at the bottom. It describes the project, and I've included a link. Now I haven't uploaded the updated code to AWS, so I'll want to do that as well. So the README is our documentation file. So in your assignment, you need a README there as well. It should describe what kind of assignment did you build? Workout tracker, is it a shopping list? Is it a recipe site? What is it, and what is the link to the live site? You should include it in your. Now there's one other really valuable piece of Git that we're not going to use this semester, but we will in the future. I'll just show it to you quickly, but we're not going to get into it until September. And then I have a few minutes for debugging. So the commit process is documented here as well. Git is also a critical component to Devops, which is something we'll look at. And Devops includes something called continuous integration and continuous deployment. What this allows us to do, so right now, my code is on GitHub, but my AWS site, it's out of date, right? Locally, so my home page on my local server, right, it now has this with our list. I'll put my password back in. But I haven't actually updated my home page here, right? I need to go to AWS and open up FileZilla and upload the files. That's the old way of updating our web servers. With this continuous integration model, we can actually link our website directly to a GitHub repository. So when we push changes to GitHub, our website will update automatically. I'll show you quickly what this looks like. We'll do this in later semesters. So we're not going to do it in this term, but you should know it's there. Just have to log into my app. So with this continuous integration, continuous deployment, I can connect my web server to a Git repository. So every time I make changes to my Git repository, it automatically updates the web server. I don't need to use FileZilla to copy my files. And I can roll back if I break something, I can redeploy an earlier version of the site. With FileZilla, I don't have this ability, right? If I overwrite files and break them, I've got to go and figure out how to get them back and re-upload. So Git is a critical part of this continual cycle. We code, we build, we test, and then we automatically deploy to the server our changes. So we can't do this with AWS this term, but we will next semester with ASP.NET, and again the following semester with Node.js, where our web server is integrated with our Git repository. So that's coming in the future. Okay, so for your assignment, you'll need a new private repository that you invite me. Okay, Hamid, you do the exact same thing in PHP Storm that I did in Visual Studio Code. You run the Git commands in the terminal. Devops is the integration of code development and operations or deployment to the server. So it allows us to back up our code, to create new versions of our code, and to integrate it in deploying it to the server all in one process. We'll do more with DevOps in later semesters. But learning to use GitHub is an important part of that DevOps process. Okay, that's all for today. Hamid, I will also answer your question, if I can find it. Hamid, you may have to ask your question again. So if your code is up on GitHub, for another project, do we start with the command? No, for another project, you would start with Git Init. So every project, so here's my afternoon class, I would initialize Git in here as well. So every project, you would initialize Git. So Masa, again, you can find the Git commands as well on Blackboard. So Git Init, we do once. Git Add, we do for every commit. We make our new commit. The remote add origin, again, you only do this once when you're creating the new repository, and then the push is the upload. So once our repository is linked, it's 3 commands: add, commit, push each time. Okay, Tyler, if it's working, the Git folder is hidden, so you won't see it by default. To see it, if you click on View, you have to show hidden items. So you won't see it unless hidden items is on.